video is a journey in consciousness as we descend from the symmetry of the ideal into the refracted representation of symmetry produced by the conscious mind. So we have the totality of what is, the reality, so to speak. And then we have the version of reality that exists within the refraction of language, which is the refraction of the conscious mind. So, a circle is both one and an infinite number of lines. A sphere is both one and an infinite number of lines. Now, human consciousness cannot hold an infinite number of lines, and so it refracts the whole into language, into words, and words mark the points on the sphere. We have an infinite spectrum of color, and then we break that color up into different points that we call this is red, and this is orange, and this is yellow. But in truth, there is an infinite continuum as yellow moves into red. Yellow moving into red can be refracted 1 billion times, provided we invent the distinctions. In this case, 1 billion distinctions. If we make a unit of measurement that's capable of going up into 1 billion, and we look at it spatially or in consciousness, we have a point and we have a point, and this can be broken up as 1, it can be broken up as 2, it can be broken up as 4, it can be broken up as 1 billion. But what's interesting, as the whole, as the one, moves into the many through the refraction of the conscious mind, what's interesting is that the refraction points are defined by language, 1, and 2, that there is an infinite amount of space between each of the refraction points. Now, we can see this spatially. We can see this spatially, that we take this unit and we divide it into 4, but we could then take this unit and divide it into 4, and we could take this unit and divide it into 4. We can refract a one, a symmetry, a whole, a sphere, into an infinite number of distinctions, providing we have the consciousness to hold the distinction. And this is, of course, where it all breaks down, because whether we belong to this cult, this period, or this period, for many of us, it's difficult to recall in a single moment a single phone number. Handed a 20-digit number out of nowhere, most of us fall down in the capacity to hold a 20-digit number in a single moment. We have to break it into bits. Okay, let's say 4. Let's do it in 5 bits of 4. Can we remember it that way? 1982. 1982. What can I associate? We have to do a lot of mind work. We have to do a lot of finagling of consciousness in order to hold a single 20-digit number. Many of us can go into a room, talk about, meet someone for the first time, talk about them, and then be asked 5 minutes later what color were their eyes, and we don't have the answer. And so the symmetry, the beauty, the truth, the goodness, the symmetry of the one, of the sphere, of the infinite number of lines, gets collapsed into something rather crude that is an illusion, meaning this is what's real, but this is a heuristic representation of what's real. A heuristic representation is a useful analog. It's a useful parallel reality at a level of simplicity capable of being grasped by the person who's trying to navigate a field of play, a field of possibility that is infinitely bigger than the conscious mind can comprehend. Infinitely bigger than the conscious mind can comprehend. But we can usually pull off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I can remember that. What's my schedule? An infinite number of minutiae, but in 7 habits of highly effective people. Why 7? Is it really that there are no more than 7 habits of highly effective people? Or is 7 simply all that we can remember? And so within each 7, we can then make 7 distinctions. And then within those distinctions, 7 strategies. And we can kind of drill into. But if we have 280 habits of highly effective people, we won't remember more than 3 of them. So if it's 7, we're kind of pushing it, but maybe we'll remember all 7. What was it? Sharpening the saw, the 7th habit, And so can we create a heuristic model of reality that is not real, but that takes us into the general terrain of what's real? Because surely, so in this line from here to here, you have an infinite number of distinctions, but they are unconscious, so they're not real to the conscious mind. They're real. They're more real than this line here. They're more real than this line here, but they're not real to the conscious mind. Why? Because they're not in language. The infinite color continuum as you move from yellow to red is more real than the heuristic model of colors where we break up in color swatches and say this is Pantone yellow, this is this yellow, this is it. Why broken up that way? Why is it that every paint company has maybe 100 versions of yellow? But why only 100? Why not 1,000,000 versions of yellow? Well, at some point it's overwhelming to the conscious mind, and so it's not about truth. It's about a level of simplicity that I can put into language. I can look at 100 swatches and say, I don't know, what should I be looking at? And I can be told, well, look at the darker hues. And then I can look at those, and then I can be told, do this and that. I can look. I can look and be guided in that region and then say, okay, I want Pantone yellow. I want this, And I can hold that. And once I've picked it, thank goodness, I can forget about all the other hundreds of colors, and that's it. That's the one. Now I can focus something. Now I can rest. My conscious mind is peaceful because I've reduced the complexity of reality down to a heuristic model of reality that I can comprehend. The infinite continuum of distinctions is reduced into one line. Now, as we know with long division, when you reduce a whole number down into a fraction of some kind, you have a remainder. And that remainder creates a problem because reality is whole. Reality is whole until it is refracted through language, at which point it breaks down into pieces. Pieces that are held within the conscious mind. We know of no place, no reservoir of consciousness to hold these distinctions outside of the conscious mind, because it's not at all clear scientifically that this finger is separate from this finger, because there's a lot of things that hold them together. For example, the genetic pattern holds them together. They both get fed from the same heart, and it's like, okay, fine. There's a lot connecting one part of the body to the other part of the body. We got it. Okay. But consciousness says this is a finger, and this is a separate finger from this finger. Now, why don't we break it down into joints? Why don't we say move these 3 joints or move this? Rather, point your middle finger. Why don't we say point the 3 joints? Why don't we say point the 2,800,000,000 atoms in one finger? Why don't we say point that? Point 2,800,000,000 atoms between these billion. Why don't we say that? It's all about a model of reality that's manageable for that most obtuse of all scientific instruments, the conscious mind. The conscious mind, oh my God, 800 billion, no, just the middle finger. So we collapse the complexity down to a heuristic model of reality that is not as real, because it is simpler, because it is cruder, it is less conscious. There's significantly more consciousness in a billion distinctions than in one distinction. Just call it red. I don't care what red. I want something red. That's all I want. Nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. Just call it red. I don't want a billion versions of red. There are a billion versions of red, and understanding and being aware of a billion versions of red takes more consciousness, takes more sophistication of language to have a billion words for red. The indigenous peoples in Alaska, I'm told, have 400 words for snow. We just call it snow, because they have a more intimate relationship with a primary component in their environment that determines survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, that has huge repercussions in all of their core human needs, referencing Abraham Maslow. So if you're living in an environment where the difference between slightly wet snow that's getting colder and slightly wet snow that's getting warmer means the difference between the life and death of your family, then you fucking better have 400 words for snow. Because the relationship with the need to survive is fragile. If, on the other hand, snow is a periodic, interesting, holiday, festive something or other that they spray out of Disney machines in the town of Celebration to, remind one of the holiday spirits, you don't barely need to distinguish between, are those soap bubbles or are they real fake, powdered snow. You don't need to know the difference, because it's not determining your survival, your security, etc. And so this brings to the next point, that pain and fear, the anticipation of pain repeating itself in the future, that pain produces distinction. How's your body doing? It's fine. It's a very crude way of speaking of it. It's fine. Well, as you start getting an arthritic joint here and a, blister here, and it's looking a little red there, and this and that, suddenly, as you spend time talking with an elderly person in the United States, there's all kinds of distinctions. Well, my bone here is doing this, and my elbow is like that, and my this, and all these distinctions produced by pain, produced by suffering. I'm no longer fine. I am a long list of painful ailments displayed, and they may not be very pleasant, but it's conscious, leading some to suggest that there may not be a difference between consciousness and pain. Well, truly so. When we avoid consciousness at all costs, pain pays us a visit. Because when we avoid consciousness, we do not respect the relationship between ourselves and the environment that gives birth to ourselves. Because going back to the distinctions that our conscious mind creates between a finger and a finger, what about the connection? What about the connection? We, of course, make a distinction between one finger and another finger. We make a bigger distinction between my finger and your finger. Then we make a bigger distinction between my finger and a chimpanzee's finger. And then we make a bigger distinction between my finger and a rock. It's like not much holding those two together. There's nothing in common between a finger and a rock. Well, how about gravity? How would it be if the rock existed in a universe that had a different law of gravity than the finger? And you think, wait a minute, the finger and the rock are both in the same universe. If they were in different universes, by definition of the word universe, we wouldn't know about it because we'd have to be in one of them. We'd have to be in one universe, and then we wouldn't know about the other universe. Okay, so then the rock and the finger that we're talking about are in our universe. They're in our universe, our story of one. Now we have the question of what does this rock and this finger have together? Well, how about the law of gravity? How about the fact that in a universe, if the law of gravity changes out near the rings of Saturn, and I'm not talking about the actual gravitational equation in different gravitational fields, I'm talking about the code, the underlying code. If the law of gravity changed in one part of the universe, it changes everywhere in the universe because it is a universe as opposed to a multiverse. In a multiverse, of course, you have the concept of something existing out of your universe. In the universe, the law of gravity is constant for a rock and a finger. It's constant for a thigh bone and a chest bone. It's constant for an ape and a fish. Applied in different environments, mitigated, affected, but a constant. I mean, the law of universe is like the number 2. You can take the number 2 and you can cut it in half. You can cut it in half, and now you have 1 and 1. 1 and 1 makes 2. You put it back together again, it's still 2. You can mitigate, you can work with the law. But what this means is that if a rock at the far reaches of the galaxy decided to change the law of gravity, you see, now we're into poetic terrain, decided to change the law of gravity and was successful. If a rock ordered up a new law, passed a bill to change the law of gravity, the law of gravity changes for every single object in the entire universe. Because that's what makes it a law, its constant presence as an underlying fabric upon which the conscious mind separates the unified field of ecological reality into the distinction. This is my finger and that's your finger, and they are separate. except that the law of gravity is constant, except that the strong and the weak force are constant, except that the magnetic field, except, they're not separate. When you really look deeply at the mathematical formula of a universe or of a moment, you cannot unravel it out of context with the other moments that preceded it, that superseded it, and that will follow. You cannot separate a moment from the moments that came before and the moments that came after, because the principle of momentum, another constant, the principle of momentum is present. You take a hand rising like that. This doesn't exist without this that's leading up to it. And this doesn't exist without this that comes after. It's connected. A moment in time is stitched neatly throughout all the moments of time that come before and become after. A finger is laced to the past and to the present and to the future. A finger is laced tightly to the thread, to the ecological and mathematical formula that ripples out into time-space as far as consciousness can comprehend, and further and further. Set theory dictates that there's always something outside the set. We're in a set of consciousness. We're in a set of representational reality through the lens of language, as perceived by unique veils of perception, of biology, of the instrument of the human heart, the instrument of beliefs. There's a whole set of filters that make this representational version of reality more real and more unique to us, and different for someone else looking at the same pattern from another angle, each through the lens of language, but different language. Different language. Now, when consciousness is overlaid on a reality that is too big for consciousness, you have the unconscious mind, which is vastly bigger than the conscious mind. You have a higher conscious mind, you have a subconscious mind. All of these are bigger than the conscious mind. The conscious mind is like the laser beam or zoom-in lens on a DVD player. Reality is present in its entirety before, during, and after the laser touches on the image in a sequence in time. One could say that if you had a consciousness capable of seeing the 200 million images stored on a Blu-ray DVD, on a Blu-ray disc, that it would take no time to digest the entire movie. It would take no time because you would process and digest the entire pattern of events within a moment, because your consciousness would be big enough to digest 200 million images as opposed to 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. Oh, that's interesting. What will happen next? 1 plus 1. You go around in circles. Time is a circular fractal pattern. Things repeat themselves over and over and over again until they become conscious. Until they become conscious. And then they still may repeat themselves, but there's also the chance of divergence, because there's the participation of the conscious mind with a force of momentum of conscious will that engages with reality, that partners with something vastly bigger than itself. So what happens to all of the distinctions in reality, the billion plus distinctions that get reduced into one? They are discarded in the semi-conscious, in the unconscious, and the higher conscious. They are discarded in the light and dark shadow defined by the cult, defined by the family system, defined by the law, the microcosm, the fractal microcosm of the individual ego, holding the pattern for the family, holding the pattern for the cult, holding the pattern for the government. A pattern replicated at larger and larger scales, at smaller and smaller scales. This is why, among other things, that the level of consciousness, now what is a level of consciousness? It is a level of distinction. So one could measure the sophistication of consciousness by a couple of different continuums. One would be the number of articulated distinctions. Another would be about the level of synergistic interrelationships of the distinction. If you think of a car motor, for example, and all of the different parts, so a car has well over 1,000 parts in it. And the sophistication of a car is in part measured, not just on the fact that all of the 1,000 parts have a label and have a name, but that all of the parts, 1,000 parts, are all working together to create something more, to create a synergy, to create freedom of movement, to create transportation. And so we have this dynamic. 1,000 parts synergistically relating to one another takes a higher level of consciousness than one part that has no relationship consciously with anything. Unconsciously, it has infinite relationships with everything. But consciously, the conscious mind doesn't see the relationship between one thing and another. And why is this remainder a problem? Because that which is unconscious and engaged with is violated. There is a violence and a lack of conscious attunement with that which is unconscious. If I recognize that this is a hand, and I engage with this hand with another hand, there is respect, looking and looking again, respect, and there is attunement. And to the degree that there is attunement, there is flow. There is a partnering of sorts. There is a reduction in energy consumption, a reduction of friction. To the degree that we do not see something, we bang into it. I didn't see you there. I wasn't paying attention, and so I banged into you. I violated you. I didn't see. I didn't see that there was a connection between this and this. I didn't see you there, and so I hit you. If I drive into you with my car, I damage both you and the car. And in doing so, I damage my confidence in driving. And in doing so, there is a ripple effect that reaches out into my entire life. It is impossible to change one thing without changing everything. But it is very possible with a simplistic level of consciousness to change many things and have no idea about how those things change everything else. Which is why Einstein refers to the fact that one can create a problem. Even the word problem is a faulty distinction, because a problem only exists within the conscious mind. A problem is the remainder, because I can't come up with 10 billion distinctions, which even if I could, would only be 10 billion distinctions of the infinite distinctions that define the interaction with the sphere. I can't come up with 10 billion distinctions, but even if I could, they would only be 10 billion distinctions of the infinite distinctions that a sphere can be refracted into, that one can be turned into many, infinitely. But my conscious mind cannot even hold what a computer can hold, and a computer cannot hold the full equation. In set theory, that which is within the set is by definition smaller than the set. The computer, admittedly capable of holding higher levels of distinctions. For example, most of us would have a hard time naming more than 30 colors. Name more than 30 colors. We're looking at them all the time. The color spectrum is infinite. The color spectrum is infinite. Most of us would have a hard time naming more than 30 colors. Now, a computer can name 256 million colors. In other words, it breaks the infinite color spectrum down into 250 million separate bits. Computer has therefore millions more distinctions than you and I have in terms of language. But it is still within the set of language, which is a set. It's a type of consciousness that the computer is not conscious of itself. It takes a human being to be conscious that a computer is capable of breaking the infinite color spectrum down into 256 million pieces, which are not terribly useful, because if we look at 200,999,001 versus 900,002, our eye can't tell the difference. But a computer can tell the difference based on a code. A computer is inventing the distinctions by the distance of its refracted, the distance it's using to refract. In an infinite color spectrum, if you break it into 256 million, you have a relatively small distance between one color and another, and the eye isn't going to notice it. But a computer can measure it, can say that's, if the camera is capable of detecting and storing in a pixel format, capable of sending that message to the computer, it can say which color it is or which it is. It just doesn't mean anything to the computer. It's simply spitting out a number. The problem of human consciousness exists in the remainder that is left over and is unconscious and is thus dishonored and violated. After we have butchered the whole into the crudeness of human language, the crudeness of human language, by definition, butchers the infinite of the more real down into a crude, ungainly, ugly representation of reality that we can comprehend and relate to, not because it is real, not because it is true, not because it is good, but because we are capable of holding a certain amount of complexity through the processing lens of our senses and our conscious mind in a synergy of imagination and human consciousness, a synergy that our best scientists have faith that they can understand, but which they do not. That our best scientists have faith, a piece of language, faith, a belief in something that has not been substantiated. There is no scientist on the planet that can create human consciousness in a test tube and this can bestow it on the best computers. There is no scientist on the planet that can locate it absolutely in one area of the body, or even be sure that it's in the body. Rupert Sheldrake has been poking away at some of that. We have all kinds of preposterous, paradigm-shattering, incongruous stories and distinctions that are ruining the simplicity, the crudeness of the purely physical, rational, reductionistic, Cartesian logic, so heavily leaned on by the scientific method. Cartesian logic hinges upon the vision of an angel. René Descartes, a soldier returning home from war, is visited by an angel. An angel tells René Descartes, "Go forth. The world will be mastered in the study of measurement and numbers." And René Descartes, the founder of Cartesian logic, has faith in the angel. An angel gives birth to modern science, which, like so many tantruming children who did not get the love they deserved, rise up and slay their parents. The obsession of materialistic, rationalistic logic with slaying the transcendent is something to behold. It is an act of sheer faith. It is an act of passion with which materialistic, rationalistic, reductionistic scientists slaughter the possibility that angels exist. Except, as any good mathematician or problem solver will point out, how can you murder the angel that gave you the tools to murder the angel? How can you slay the parents that gave you the body to cut them into so many mental, emotional, and physical pieces? How is it that rational people can blithely overcome a mathematical impossibility to murder that which gave birth to itself, as if it never existed, but the product of what never existed still remains. How can 10 2x4s get together and build a house? And in that house, invent a subject. And in that subject, invent an idea that 2x4s don't exist and never have existed and are bad. The narrative, the formula collapses. How do you get to 257 if, having arrived at 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 257, just counting up all the ones, and having reached 257, how do you turn around and delete all the ones that produced the number? How does a business that makes $200 million in profit turn around and delete the income that led to that bottom line and still have the bottom line? How does a derivative dissociate itself from and attack its fundamental underlying value? How does human consciousness attack the fabric of itself out of which it emerged as a crude representation? How is it that the smallest part of reality denies the existence of the biggest part of reality rather than the other way around? And the answer is precisely because it's so small. With a zoom-in lens, you can pretend that everything that's not in the zoom area of focus doesn't exist, because it doesn't inside the zoom-in lens of the conscious mind. Once you zoom in to chauvinism, once you zoom in to doctored history, once you zoom into cult values, once you decimate the vast regions of the psyche, once you reduce human vocabulary to less than 10,000 words used in regular basis, and break the totality of infinity down into less than 10,000 increments of measurement, and then repeat a few of those constantly day after day, and then zoom in, and then even of that take half of your sensory perception and discard it. Scientists know that the eye sees at least 50% more than the mind sees. Right now, your eye is noticing things that you're not noticing, because you're noticing something else. You cannot even process 100% of the data from your own eye. So what you see as reality is, it's not even a heuristic version of reality in the crudest possible sense. It's half of that. It's half of a crude rendition of reality created through the lens of language. And having created this prism and this prison of seeing so little, in the midst of traumatic ignorance and traumatic history, we fear the unknown. We are afraid of turning the zoom lens out there and in here into the vastness that exists beyond the repetitive patterns that feel safe in their familiarity, that feel safe in the promise of their protection from an unknown that is vastly bigger than the known. My version of reality is not fully symmetrical. It is crude at its best. And it dishonors the vast majority of what is. It dishonors the vast majority of what is by creating remainders, by taking the one and dividing it between 3.7. And there's this area in the sphere that is left out of the equation. It is the remainder. And it is this remainder that we transform into the illusion of a problem. We transform it into the illusion of a problem because we lack the humility to acknowledge the limitations of the illusion of consciousness that creates the problem in the first place. In other words, when you take the sphere, when you take the whole as an ecological one, as a mathematical formula in which every possible combination of numbers takes place, in every set of the number system. We have a 10-point number system. So after 9, we repeat. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then we go back to 1 just to 0. So we have 9 levels of distinctions. What if we had 27? Or if we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, zing, wonkel, ingle, backtalk, just go up to 27 and then repeat. Could the whole be refracted through a 27 and then repeat number system? Of course. Would it look different? Of course. Can this amount of space be refracted in centimeters? Of course. Can it be refracted in millimeters? Can it be refracted in inches? How about cinches or hedges? All those number systems that we have not gotten around to examining because it's too much to think about. But the key thing is that whatever the repetitive pattern, it slices the whole into different distinctions. And we are only conscious of the distinction. We're not conscious of the space between the distinction. We're only conscious of the masculine point. We note this point and this point. We do not have the sophistication to experience or be aware of the infinite space in between of the feminine that is one and infinite at the same time. We say, I am a worldly person because I can name the countries. A little dot and a little dot and a little dot, and I have 200 dots in my vocabulary. Aren't I smart? I know all about it. That's Zambia over there, and that's this. But I know nothing about the feelings. I know nothing about the temperature differentiation as it touches my body at 6 p.m. with a fly bugging and eating. I know nothing. I know nothing about nothing. And yet, I think I know so much because I mark not the infinite space in between. A proton and an electron form an atom. And then there's 99% space in between that we don't see. We just see the solid bit, and we don't see and feel the space. The space is hard to measure. But the points, how many square feet, how many this, how many that? What's the cost per square foot over here versus over here? I can calculate that, and that's better than that is because cheap is good and da-da-da-da-da. all fabrications created by you and I, created by a cult, to relate to itself through the illusion of language, the illusion that collapses when we understand there have been 10,000 cults in human history, 10,000 languages, and most of them have disappeared from whence they came. We do not have the consciousness to be conscious of what we're not conscious of. We cannot speak even 3, even 10, even 20 of those 10,000 languages that came, that broke up reality in a set number of ways, and then overlaid a mythological, a cosmological structure, a theme, and then dissolved, making room for the next crop of cult fascination, of cult imagination, to say, no, this is the way reality is. This is the way reality is. This is the way reality. And of course, every cult, including our own, thinks that we have it right. There have been no cults in human history that said, this is the way we do it because it's the wrong way to do it. This is the way we talk because this is an utter nonsense way of talking. You had better copy me and your mom because we don't know what we're doing. So do what we say because we know nothing. We're fools. We will be erased in a matter of 1,000 years. Everything that we're telling you now is complete and utter nonsense. And, the sooner we die, the better, because that's how things will evolve. And so what are you going to do? You're going to copy us and make it easy for us because we learned this nonsense from our parents? Are you going to copy us and make it easy for us? Or are you going to speed up evolution by creating the new cult right here and now, the new illusion, the new distinction, the new language, the new cosmology that is no better at capturing the totality of the whole than the last? Or one could say, as a mathematical objectivity, looking at reality through the lens of mathematics, that to the degree that the whole is broken up into more and more distinctions is to the degree that there is less and less of a remainder. Because one of the ways of looking at the sphere is, for example, if you cut it in half in a dualistic paradigm, you've got a remainder of 50%. It's kind of an inefficient model when half of reality is to be thrown out, and where the justification of the other half's goodness is the evil of the other half. It's rather a weak model of reality, but you've got a 50% waste factor. So let's break the circle into thirds. You've still got a lot of reality that doesn't fit within the paradigm. So let's break it into sixes. Well, see, now we've got less waste. We've only got illusion, unconsciousness existing out here. We've got language that covers a lot of it. When we geometrically apply all of these distinctions, we can create a color palette of consciousness that is sophisticated enough to handle, 80% of at least what's known in our set in reality? And we've got these little remainders, these bits, though. You see, so the more sophisticated one is, the more one eliminates the waste. Because if you take the, 6-sided version of reality and turn it into a 12-sided version of reality, a 24-sided version of reality, as you continue to take reality and divide it into more and more bits, you now have a phenomena. Where there's less and less that is outside the domain of language. And so there's less and less waste, which means there's less and less stuff that is unconscious that we bump into and don't know what to do with. So as we develop sophistication in consciousness, we eliminate waste. It's no different in a manufacturing process. Our most sophisticated manufacturers recycle energy wherever possible because it is intelligent to do so. At its heart, capitalism is a design system that rewards efficiency. The efficiency with which time, money, and natural resources are transformed into value correlates with the return on capital. And in a capitalistic paradigm, we reward efficiency. If you can take my dollar and turn it into $2 faster than this person who can take my dollar and turn it into $2, I'll give my dollar to you. Because you're more efficient. You're more efficient at creating value than they are through the metric of time. Now, if you can turn my dollar into $5 faster than you can turn it into $2, well, now you've got hordes of investors lining up. Of course, providing the volatility, providing the risk is mitigated and all that, etc. But we are a cult that values money more than human beings, and we value efficiency, the efficiency of producing money, as a symbol of our deity being cash. Those who transform cash into more cash more efficiently than anyone else, the Buffetts of the world, the Ray Dalios of the world, the John Templetons of the world, we reward them with whatever they want on the human need continuum. Survival, security, in our cult, riches can buy the law. Riches can buy the law. Survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, a sense of opportunity to grow and develop one's gifts and share them with the world, because we are a cult that worships people who turn money into more money and thus have lots of money. And of course, in a cult hierarchy of values, in which there's a Forbes 400 list, but there's no Forbes 400 kindest list. I mean, the Forbes 400, by definition, it doesn't need to be the 400 richest people. It's just the Forbes 400, because what else would be measured in a cult like ours other than how much money do they have? We're not asking about how well do you sleep? What about the 400 people who sleep well? What about the 400 people who sleep more peacefully than anyone else in the country? Wouldn't that be a great list? The Forbes 400 most nourished in the morning people, and that heart monitors were dispatched all around the country to measure who was sleeping the best, and the person who had the nicest dreams, and just every night, no matter what went on in their day, they had magnificent dreams, woke up refreshed in the morning, any toxins built up in the body kind of just dissipated through the landscape of psychology and mythology and images and all that intersection with biology. They just woke up feeling great and energized. And these were the people we celebrated because we cared about joy, we cared about the feminine, we cared about presence, we cared about the semi and unconscious mind, we cared about images. The Forbes 400 list of most rested, healthy, happy sleepers in the country, and that this would be carefully competed over. How did they do it? What was their diet? All of this. Wouldn't it be wonderful? It would be a different cult. It would be a different cult. We're the cult that sacrifices sleep. We're the cult that sacrifices the feminine. We're the cult that sacrifices soul in order to end up on the list of who has the most paper, which is to some extent, an absurd list because after around the 10 million point, there's very little difference in daily life. And the happiness data of Sonia Lyubomirsky and others does not support the idea that going from 100,000 to 10 million makes you 100 times happier, makes you even 20% happier. Many people, as they go from 100,000 to 10 million, get worse because they're sacrificing. They're making the money sacred by giving up on their body or giving up on their relationships or giving up on truth. Gee, if I just lied here and here, I could have an extra million. So I give up my integrity. I make the money sacred by sacrificing part of my strength for a bit of paper. That, statistically speaking, isn't going to do it, but that's why our cult is destined to collapse like every other cult in history. A cult takes the whole, emphasizes part of it, refracts the reality around that, denies the rest, and goes to war with itself. Goes to war with itself. It's like the absurdity of a circle dividing itself into 3 parts and then one part going to war with the other 2 parts. There has never been a time in human history where the conscious self that went to war with the probability field of the unknown and the unconscious mind ever came out the victor. There's never been a point when a single idiot with a gun fought and conquered the rest of humanity. You know, Hitler and Stalin, and they're not single idiots. They're partnering with millions and millions of people that believe and buy in to different mythologies, and they crumble. Every cult will crumble because every cult is built on a dogma with a primary function of protecting us from the vastness of the unknown that exists outside the cult, from the vastness of the unknown that exists beyond our our conscious mind, from the vastness of reality that exists outside the limitations of our vocabulary of language. You cannot go to war with a bigger part of yourself. There's never been a time when the hand went to war with the body and won. Not the least of which is if the hand succeeds in strangling the body, its victory is short-lived. Hooray! Hooray! I've killed that body. And then it goes limp. The heart that fed it no longer beats. So it's a short-lived victory if it occurs at all, which is unusual. And yet, cults demand that one generation after the next swear obedience to the dogma of the cult. Swear obedience. This is the way it is. This will last forever. This is the only way. Kill the others. Get rid of them. Don't associate with those types of people. How could you listen to the conservatives? What were you doing? Don't muddy the water. It's hard enough going from unconscious, muddy terror and confusion of the unknown to some nice organized system of chopping an infinite whole into a little bit of bits. It's nice. It's hard enough doing that without you realizing that there's 100 million ways of slicing up the whole. You can take a piece of pizza and slice it up 10 billion different ways and still have room for more. But we can't deal with even the time, given our limited transmission style, our limited bandwidth, that transmitting and engaging with reality through vibrations through the mouth, given the fact that it takes 2 hours simply to understand what can be grasped in a second. And even then, we all have different versions of reality. Our communication system is too crude to even count to 1 billion, let alone debate 1 billion. And so it's shut up or get the hell out of here. We are a dogma. We're not a science. We're a dogma of simplicity. We are a dogma of conformity. And you fit in or get the hell out of here, because we are not counting to 1 billion and feeling like idiots and getting lost and getting out there in the unknown and wondering how this and the we're not going there. We're showing up the way we always show up, and it pleases me immensely. It pleases me immensely that you are the way you always were, and if you're not, we're going to pretend you are anyway and keep pushing you into that little box, because it's so much easier than figuring out who you actually are and how to relate to that, let alone who this person is and how to relate to that. It's so much easier. Every cult has a line, and the line is defined by what is part of the cult and what is not part of the cult. It's not defined by science, because as we saw, a rock has an infinite number of connections with your finger. A rock on Jupiter has an infinite number of connections to your finger that a scientist might take 2-3 hours to begin to illuminate. And say, well, what's common between the rock on Jupiter and the finger? You've got gravity. What's common is you've got different atoms and molecules. Well, why don't they have different atoms on Jupiter? Well, they don't. Oh, they're organized differently and this and that and the other, but they're still atoms. It's like there's a lot in common. They're still part of the universe. They still, light affects that area over there just the way it affects here. You can see light with the eye there. You can see it here. There's a lot in common between a rock on Jupiter and this finger. So that's just the way it is. But it is incredibly easy. It's incredibly easy to be unconscious, to be asleep, to have no sense of connection with anything. This is the tragedy of our cult. The fact that we produce conscious minds that feel misunderstood, unlistened to, alone, lonely, and hopeless of ever feeling connected. And if you understand the amount of work it takes to create that state, the amount of sustained dogmatic effort it takes to take a part of the whole, a mathematician will tell you that if you delete one single number from an entire equation, the entire equation doesn't work. You can have an equation 200 million numbers long, and you delete one number, and the entire equation changes. Meaning you can't take you out of the equation and still have the equation. The equation shifts. You can't take you out of your cult without the cult equation shifting. You can't take you out of your family without the family equation shifting. The entirety of the whole, which is refracted into the illusion of distinction by the conscious mind, cannot be put back together without you, because your equation, your number, connects to every other number in the entire equation. And yet our cult has managed to deluge its people's minds with enough distractions, sketchy beliefs, dogmatic denials, and avoidances of vast terrains of the psyche and reality, has managed to convince its people that we are isolated, meaningless, purposeless, lonely, alone, bits of random stuff that have absolutely nothing to do with anything. And so you might as well die, because you don't matter. Nobody knows you. Nobody understands you. And that's just the way it is. It's just the way it is because that's how all dogmatic cults define existence. You ask someone, why are we going to school to learn algebra, something that you have never learned or used once in your entire life? That's just the way they're done around here. Things are done like that. Well, why are they done like that? Well, don't ask me that. That's an intelligent question. It's just how things are done. Every dogmatic cult is held together not by science, not by intelligence, but by the stupidity of fear-based repetition in the underlying value, in service to the underlying value of protecting the individuals in the cult from the vastness of the unknown, which the cult cannot dominate and never has been able to, cannot teach you to dominate and never has been able to do, cannot protect you from. If you want to run into this aspect of reality without paying attention or learning about it, your cult can't protect you from the consequences of that interaction. It can't protect you from yourself. In one of the most resource-intensive cults in human history, in which a United States citizen will consume and then discard 102 tons of energy called garbage by the cult. We've invented the word for garbage as a heuristic, simplistic version that ignores our ignorance about ecological thinking, and that simply recategorizes vast amounts of energy in the forms of 200 tons of 102 tons of weight, and says that's garbage. Another way of saying that is this is stuff that we've worked hard to create that we don't know what to do with, and so we're going to put it into a big hole or burn it, because that's the only thing that we can think of to get rid of it. And since we don't see any value in burning it or dumping it into a big hole, we're going to create a word to mark the place of our ignorance. And the word is garbage, that which we don't know what to do with. And so since we don't know what to do with it, surely there couldn't be anything constructive that could be done with it. So it must be garbage. Surely if there was anything in the world that could be done with all these plastic bags, we would be doing it. There isn't, and so it's garbage. An illusion created by language. The mathematics of the whole says that there is something useful and constructive to be done with everything. But that admittedly, some things are harder to do something constructive with than others. And admittedly, you cannot solve a problem solve a remainder, respond to the challenge created by the illusion of garbage with the same level of consciousness, the same level of distinctions that creates the illusion of garbage. Garbage doesn't exist except in the conscious mind. The conscious mind says this is good and this is bad, and I'm going to create these good things. But as a result of creating these good things, there are also these bad things. And since I don't know what to do with bad things, I will call them garbage and I'll put them in a big hole in the ground. You can't solve the remainder left outside the cult boundary with the same level of language, with the same level of paradigm, with the same level of distinction as the one that you put it in there with. You have a crisis of consciousness. The crisis of consciousness comes from the simplicity of the paradigm, which is also something broken up with language. With language. When you say that life is a materialistic, meaningless, what? Just a meaningless something. The biggest joke around, by the way, is the materialists who believe that life is meaningless want you to read their books, which are meaningless, according to them, to hear their thoughts, which don't really exist, according to them. Because the hardcore materialists don't believe that consciousness is real. And that if it is, it has no purpose. Which means that their book doesn't have any purpose. I mean, if you believe them, why would you waste the money buying their book? Why do they waste the time writing their book? Because they don't believe what they're saying. Any rationalist, reductionist, materialistic scientist who isn't out just flooding their body with drugs and whatever until they're dead doesn't believe what they're actually saying. Because if they really believed that reality was pointless, you don't write a book and make a point of trying to get other people to believe what you believe based on faith. Because that's all it is. There is no proof that life is pointless. So it's an act of faith. And it's very odd religious practice to try and recruit other people and get them to understand that everything you're saying has no value. Because the place that you're saying from, the delusion of human consciousness, doesn't even exist. It's really, really important that you understand that listening to me isn't actually happening because it's me saying it. It's really important that you understand that my book is a waste of everyone's time and energy and is an illusion. But please buy it. Because why, if it has no meaning? Why? Because I want significance. I want to matter to you. Because it does have meaning. Because I want to affect people. I want to matter. A fundamental human need. Of what? Of consciousness, the thing that you're saying doesn't exist. It does matter to every human being to matter. So it creates a paradox for those people that say there's no meaning in life. Because it matters to them to convince you that there's no meaning in life. They go on talks. They try and convince people to be atheists, to be this. They go on talks to show that there's no purpose to it all. But I want to be the one telling you there's no purpose. I want you to read it from me because I want to matter. It's that important to me to matter that if the only way that I can matter is to create a rendition in a book that life has no purpose and get you to buy it, I'll do it. Because that's how much you matter and your attention matters to me. That's how much my sense of meaning matters to me. So there you have the answer to the paradox. Mattering transcends the strategy of mattering. Human beings will do whatever it takes to matter. Even blow up buildings, even commit suicide. They will do what it takes to matter. Because mattering is that important within the evolutionary cycle, within the development of consciousness. And I'll leave it at that.